Hello, welcome everyone. So today what we will be doing is going over the lay of the land when it comes to Rhino 3D. So I'm going to be doing a brief introduction, and I'm going to do my best to represent the differences between the Mac and the PC version in one video. So hopefully this will be beneficial for both of you. So this is Rhino 7, which you should all have downloaded. Once you open up Rhino 7 for the very first time, you will see different templates here. This is the PC version. And you're going to select large object inches for the PC. If you have the Mac version, yours will look something like this. And you'll see under templates here, large object inches, and click on make default template if you have a Mac here, just to make it your default template. So when you open Rhino, it automatically goes to the right settings. And then with the PC version, we're going to go ahead and open up a new one here. So go File, New, and this will give you your different templates here. Go to large object inches here, click once, and then make sure use this file when Rhino starts is selected there. Large object inches. Oops, this one. Large object inches. There we go. Open. Okay. So this is the user interface for the PC, and you'll see that you have 4 different ports of view here, and you can manipulate them. You can change the sizes of them if you want, make the perspective view bigger, however you want to do that. So these are going to be your principal orthographic views, top, front, and right, and then a perspective view for more of an illusion of three-dimensional space. Each one of these viewports is controlled a little bit differently, but every time you hover over a viewport, you control that viewport. So we're using a 3-button mouse to kind of manipulate the space. And we'll start with the top view here. How do you manipulate this space? You do so with the mouse wheel, scrolling in and out. Okay. Other things, as far as controls go, we'll talk about more in a little bit, but want to show kind of the rest of the user interface here. So under the Standard tab, which you'll have this tab pulled down here, you'll have your basic tools over here. And you'll see that with the PC and the mouse and the Mac version, these toolbars up here will be very similar. You've got, of course, your standard new, open, save, blah, 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 cut, copy, paste. Then you've also got pan. If you don't have a mouse yet, go get one, but you can click on these different tools here and use that to pan around the space. Or zoom, click and drag to zoom in. And these are different zoom functions we'll get into later. And then toggling the viewports. So if you double click into the top view here, it makes it the full screen. And I like to work a lot of times in full screen, especially on a laptop where the screen is a little bit smaller. But you can toggle back into normal space by clicking right there. Then you've also got other functions on here which we will talk about a little bit later. But any of these tabs you click on, it brings up different tools to use. And mostly we'll be using standard and later on sub-D tools. Over on the right-hand side here, you have your properties inspector, your layers. So properties will talk about whatever you're using. So like it tells you which active viewport you're using, and if you draw something and click on it, it tells you about the properties for that object. Closed curves. Anything linear that you draw will be considered a curve in Rhino. Then you've got layers, and we'll talk more about layers later on, but you can basically use these similar to Photoshop or other programs where you assign objects to different layers and turn them on and off or lock them at will. Materials we'll get into much later, in a little bit of time, related to adding textures to objects. And basically I leave it on properties for now. Down here at the bottom you can see you've also got different options to toggle the viewports, and if you've got a viewport maximized and you want to switch to a different view, you can do so by toggling these. And you can add to it too if you wanted to add a new layout or something like that to it, or split the viewports in different ways. Toggle back up to 4 views right there. Other things. super important to understand are your object snaps, which are these right here. And by default, they're all disabled. So you want to make sure that you enable them. And if you don't have them enabled, down here on the PC, you'll find an option to turn on object snaps, and it'll add this to the view right here. So you want to make sure you have the same ones I have set here. End, leave near off for now. Point, mid, center, interception, perpendicular, tangent, quad, knot, vertex. These ones are the ones I use most of the time, and you can toggle them on and off with the disable key here. If you have a Mac, you will have a user interface that looks like this. So you'll have your snaps over here. Don't pay attention to the ones I've got selected here. Pay attention to the ones I've got on the PC. So I, on the PC, don't have near selected, and I do have center selected. That's the only real difference here. But you can see they are all the same. And then your top, front, right, and layouts views are right here instead of at the bottom. So the main difference with the Mac and the PC is some stuff is up at the top, it's on the bottom with the PC, and it's a little bit more graphical of a user interface when it comes to the command line, which we'll get into next. So the command line is up here on the PC, and it's basically where any of the commands that you're going to use if you're going to draw a rectangle or a line or anything like that, the shorthand, instead of finding the tool for it, is to just type it. So if I wanted to draw a rectangle, see my mouse is over here, you don't have to click up here to type in it. You just type rectangle, and it'll bring up a drop-down box that has different kinds of REC related objects here. So rectangle comes up, and you hit enter, it brings up that command. And then with the command line, you'll always be wanting to pay attention to what it's asking for next. So it'll ask for example, the first corner of the rectangle. And before I go into that, let's go back to our Mac version, talk about where your command line is. Your command line is right here. And you'll notice that when I type, or you type into the command line on the Mac version, it's going to bring up a drop-down menu that'll be right here. It looks something like this. So rectangle comes up right there. And then when you select rectangle, it's going to change your tools that are behind here. It's going to make those tools go away, and it'll bring up the next thing that the command line wants you to do. So different than this in that up here is where it tells you to bring up the next stuff on the PC, and it'll bring it up right here on the Mac. You'll see when you play with it. Okay, so I'm going to bring up rectangle. I escaped out of it. Escape gets you out of any command, so that's good to know too. If you get lost, just hit the escape button and start over. But if you want to bring up the same command again, you can hit enter, and that brings up the same command. And you can also use the space bar as enter. Space bar and enter work the same. So if you like that big space bar, you'll hear a lot of times when I'm working, I'm pounding on that sound because I use the space bar because it's big and it's an easy target to hit on my keyboard. So enter brings up the same command, and I can start to draw the rectangle it wants to know the first corner. So if I click anywhere in my space, I can start on the top view over here if I want. I can click and start to drag it out. And then it'll say, what's the other corner or the length? So I can just click randomly, which you don't do very often. If I click and start to drag out and type in how far I want this rectangle to be, I can type 12 inches, 1, 2, quote, for 12 inches, enter, and it locks me in at a length of 12 inches. And the 12 inches is basically 12 of these squares, because the way our units are set up, each one of these squares is 1 inch. So that's also helpful to know. So you can see in all 4 viewports as I'm drawing here, if I'm drawing from the top view, you can see in perspective that it's drawing out in the perspective window as well. In the front view, it's just drawing a straight line because it's flat, and in the right view, it's just drawing a straight line because it's flat from the right view. But if I move my cursor, still while in the command, into any of these other territories, like now I'm drawing it vertically because I'm in the front view. And it's still flat on the right view because from a right view, this is still flat. But if I move my cursor to the right view, now it's drawing this way. And you can look up at the perspective viewport to see how it changes based on which direction I'm drawing. So now I'm going to specify the length. So I'm going to go 16, quote, for inches, enter. And I could also draw a rectangle if I wanted to draw it 12 inches, but use foot nomenclature instead. So 1 foot, 1 apostrophe instead of quote, equals 1 foot. And then I can do 16 inches this way. And you can see in the command line the history, so you can see the different nomenclature, how it works. Okay, so that is drawing a basic rectangle, but how do you control the view, right? So top view, we already talked, you can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. Front view, same thing, zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. But if you right click with the mouse, you also get pan. So grab it with the hand and move it around. Right click with the front view, you get pan. Zoom in and out. And the 3 principal views are all the same. Where it's a little different is in the perspective view. Yes, zooming in and out with the mouse wheel works, but if you right click, it doesn't pan, it orbits. So you will rotate around the view. Okay? And in order to pan in the perspective view, you hold down Shift and right click. Shift and right click turns it into pan. Release the right click, and you're orbiting. Okay, so those are kind of the key things to understand as far as drawing in the viewports and how the command line works. And it works the same commands in PC and Mac. So I will be using PC for all of my tutorials because it works better for what I've got. I've got a better computer when it comes to the PC. So you'll be seeing a lot of this user interface. So you'll have to translate it if you have a Mac. But the commands are always the same. So if I say we're typing the command extrude, PC or Mac, it makes no difference. You'll get the same kind of steps to the process. Okay, that's the command line. Next, we've got some other things down here. Let's talk a little bit about what snaps do and that kind of stuff in a second. Let's do some basic drawing. I want to draw some lines and stuff and just kind of show you some different basic tools and how to work with them. So I'm going to start off with a polyline. Polyline is basically just a line that has multiple sides to it. So when I click, first thing it says, selecting the polyline, start, point, click. Okay. And then I can just kind of click and drag, and I can also enter, like I want to go up 12 inches. Oops. 12 inches. If I type 12 inches and don't hit enter, it gives me a 12-inch segment. So if I want to just keep making 12-inch segments, I can go 12 inch, and then any direction I go, it ends at 12 inches. So that's really nice for control. And remember, we're using CAD software because of this control, because you're doing everything to scale, because you're making things that have real relationships to size in actual space. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off this curve. Now, if you have your snaps disabled, you're going to have some problems, because when you hover over this object, you're like, how do I get it to be connected? And you need to make sure that your objects are connected, and I'll show you an example of why in a minute. So with the snaps on, you can see as I get close to it, it snaps to the other line. So that means that I've got it perfectly placed and connected, which is going to be super crucial for making 3D objects. And I'll make another one using curves over here, control point curves. And control point curves are very similar to, it's like Illustrator basically. So this one, I'm going to turn off my snaps, and I'm going to try to get as close as humanly possible to making it connect. Yeah, looks pretty good, right? What's the difference between this and this, right? Difference is, of course, snaps. So I'm enabling my snaps here. All right, so I've got a couple of funky shapes. I can click on these, and I can grab any of these points as well and move them around just by clicking and dragging, and it changes things just like the pen tool in Illustrator. Okay, so let's talk some more about why we use these different snaps. So for example, mid will allow me to, if I wanted to draw a line, from, say, the midpoint. Mid is right there. That's the midpoint. You've got center, which is super crucial for drawing circles and stuff like that. If I hover over the object, you can see I hover over the side of it and center will come up. You try to find the center here, not so much, but it works better if I do a circle. It'll be a little easier to view it, make more sense. So if I wanted to draw a circle inside of a circle, there are different parts of circles, right? This is where a quad is. Quads are the 4 quadrants of a circle. But if I'm between the quad, center comes up. And this is why you don't use near, because near grabs everywhere. So near, mid, so it grabs everywhere. So if there's nothing there, it'll grab the center of the circle, and once it does, I can continuously just use that center to draw circles that are in line with each other. So object snaps are super powerful for accuracy. All right, get rid of that. So those are really the most crucial ones, is like end point is from one point to another. Interception or perpendicular. So if I wanted to draw another shape over here and I wanted this line to go from the midpoint here straight onto this object, I get perpendicular when it's perpendicular. Okay, so those are the snaps. Other things that you want to do, if you're drawing lines and you want them to be straight instead of curvy, you can, see how this will go anywhere. If I hold down the shift button, it locks it in what we call orthographic space. So it'll go at a 90-degree angle, and then I can release the shift and I can go wherever I want. There are some presets that you can set up to ensure that you're always drawing in orthographic space. And for the PC version, they're down here at the bottom. You'll have to excuse the fact that you can't see the whole thing because I've got my text size a little bit bigger than what you probably have. But if you look at it in the Mac version, you'll see that those same settings are actually up at the top. So you've got Grid Snap, Ortho, Planar, Smart Track, and Gumball. And the ones I use most are Ortho and Gumball. And Smart Track is always just on, and it works in the background. I'll talk about how those work in a second here. So you can see those are the full spellings of the words, but they're at the top there where they're at the bottom with the PC version. So Grid Snap does just what it says. Now you know what snaps are. It allows me to draw, okay, I want to draw this 1 inch, boom. Go up 1 inch, over 2 inches, up 2 inches, it snaps to the grid. Go over the foot line, up to this foot line, so it'll snap. And if you've got that selected, sometimes it's a little annoying because it snaps into place. But if you're like, okay, I want to find the relative size of something, so I want it to be 12 inches or 3 feet, I'll draw a line from here to there, and that will just be my point of reference line that I can use. So that's Grid Snap. Turn it off. Ortho, that locks in at a 90-degree angle, so in order to make it not locked, you hit the shift. So it's the opposite, right? So if you've got the line just working all over the place, if you hit shift, it will lock it in. With ortho on, it's the opposite. So I have to hold shift in order for it to go all over the place. So when I'm doing more architectural drawings, like walls and stuff that are a lot of times at 90 degrees, I'll just leave ortho on so my pinky doesn't get tired of hitting the shift key. So that's ortho. And then O snap, of course, if you don't see your object snaps there, it's because O snap's not turned on there. Smart Track is like if you wanted to make a line up with another line. So I turn Smart Track on, and if I say I've got a line up here, and I want this end, I want to start drawing from this point on this triangle on this line. I can use see I hover over this little point, and then I move my mouse up, hover, sometimes center gets to be a pain. So if I turn center off, because it wants to snap to that center. So if I turn it off, that'll hopefully leave me alone. See, it tracks. So now if I click there, when it says interception, I know I've got it lined up with that object. So it helps lining things up, basically. It's creating projection lines that imaginarily line things up so that you can draw them in different states. So I leave that on. I don't pay much attention to it. The next one is probably the most important. It's the most fun to play with. It's Gumball. So Gumball is, if you notice when I click on an object like this, nothing comes up but the highlighted section. If I click on it with Gumball turned on, I get this. Gumball's really cool. I've got the lines here, so if I wanted to make this 3D, I can click and drag on this. If I wanted to move it around, I can click on the different arrows to move it around. If I wanted to change the scale of the object, I can click on the little boxes. So this changes the scale this way, and if I hold Shift down, it changes it this way. And if I hold down Alt, I can make copies of it by moving it. So that's the Gumball, super powerful, and we'll talk about it more when we get into the 3D space right now. So you've got all of these basic shapes here, and now I'm going to double click into perspective here because we're going to start making things three-dimensional. And with three-dimensional objects, basically we start off by using lines and then we make them three-dimensional. So if I wanted to make this object three-dimensional, I can click on the object and I can use the tool Extrude, Curve, Enter. And then pull it up, and it's now three-dimensional. But what you notice here is it looks a little bit linear and boring, and that's because of our visual style that we've got selected. Right now it's in wireframe. So there are different visual styles, and if I click on the little down arrow next to the perspective window here, or next to any window, they all have the little down arrow and they do the same thing, you get this menu that has different options. Now, those of you with the Mac are probably like, I don't have a down arrow. Well, if you don't have a down arrow, what you're doing instead to bring up the same menu, a little bit out of order, but the same menu, is you just right-click anywhere in space and it'll bring up this menu. So there's no down arrows, but if you right-click, it'll bring up this menu with the Mac version. So if I click on that and I change it from wireframe to shaded, now we're looking like something three-dimensional. You get a three-dimensional view, and this is the most optimized three-dimensional view, so those of you who don't have great graphics capabilities or using a computer that isn't super up-to-date, keep it in shaded most of the time. Other views, like rendered, are going to be a little bit more labor-intensive on your GPU or CPU. So rendered looks a little bit more realistic. Ghosted lets you kind of see through it. So if I got objects inside of objects, I can see into the object. X-ray is a little bit more linear, a little bit less rendered, but still you can see through it. And then these other ones are kind of artistic. You don't really use them much unless you wanted to use them to export your drawing and make it look like a technical drawing where you've got the dotted lines, like a technical drawing. Or artistic makes it look like it was drawn with paper and pencil, with pen. And Arctic, I don't really know what Arctic is, but it's there. And then the last one is the most labor intensive on your CPU or GPU, which is ray traced. Those of you who are used to game engines and stuff like that, or are used to playing video games, I should say, if you've got a good graphics card, you're using ray traced graphics to create the most realistic version of space. And as we add lights and materials and stuff later on in future projects, you'll see that ray traced is the best version of rendering. So let's switch back to shaded because that's what we use most of the time. And then you see that when we extruded the object, it's open, which sometimes you want, but other times you don't. So if I delete this and I bring up my extrude command again, extrude curve, and I click on this object and hit enter, and this time I click where it says solid equals no to solid equals yes, your object is solid. So let's do that again. Extrude, up, solid, yes. And then when I'm extruding, I can also type in a dimension. So if I only wanted this to go up 12 inches, if I type in 12 inches, I'm locked in at 12 inches. I'm just kind of dragging up, or I can drag down, up, down. You can see 12 inches, click, and it stays at 12 inches. So that gives you the power to control how high your extrusions are and make it nice and solid. So that's a solid object. And if you're still not getting the solid object because you've got you didn't do your snaps correctly, you'll have this issue. So I mentioned this earlier. We tried to get this as close as possible. It looks good, but when I go to extrude it, oh, I guess I got it pretty close because it did it. But sometimes your objects are a little off, like that much off. From a distance, it looks good, but it will not extrude as a solid unless those points are connecting. Easy fix, go back to the line, click on the line, make sure your snaps are turned on. That's why we have our point on here, so I can snap from point by clicking and dragging to point. Oops, it didn't work. Point to point. There we go. So now it should work. There we go. Okay. So those are some ways of making things three-dimensional. There are some other things you can do as well, and we'll get into more tools later, but as far as just user interface selecting and manipulating objects, you can sub-object select. So I can grab an edge of an object or a face of an object, and you can do that a couple of different ways. So if I Control-Shift-Click or Command-Shift-Click if you've got a Mac, I can select just one face, and then you get this little ball on here, which means you can extrude from there, or you can change the overall scale so it kind of tapers up, and shift clicking will do that, right? Or I can just click in one and bring it back in. So you can manipulate the shapes with the gumball based on sub-object selecting just one section of the object. You can pull things over a little bit, kind of manipulate it that way. I can also sub-object select and grab just the edge there. So that's Control-Shift-Click with the PC or Command-Shift-Click with the Mac. And Command is the button, I believe, next to the space bar on the Mac, for those of you who don't know. Other things you can do is you can actually go to Sub-D Tools and bring up this little window here where you've got face selecting, edge selecting, and vertex selecting. So if I can do a selection filter here, turn that on, just by point, and now I can grab just a point, and I don't have to hit Control, Shift, and click. I can just do it. It won't let me select anything but a point. So I can't select faces, I can't select edges, blah, blah, blah. And then I have to hit this to undo it all. So now I can click and select it. All right, but you don't want to warp the geometry all willy-nilly, I guess. you want to make sure you're doing it accurately because I've broken this thing. This thing, it's not going to 3D print. It's not going to work. It is completely messed up because I've got this surface going back in through the other surface, and mathematically it's wonky. So let's undo, bring it back to this. This status is actually a good one. All right. So those are some of the basics, sub-object selecting to grab faces, selection filtration, then you've got your extrusion, what goes wrong with not having curves connected to each other, drawing things to the proper scale, user interface. The last couple of things I want to talk about are some more selection tools. I want to talk about C-planes, which it's a little complicated, but it's not. So the only one I really use is C-plane to object. So if I grab this and I wanted to draw a circle right on top of this object, I switch to C-planes here and see this one, set C-plane to object. If I click on that and then click on this, now our grid is actually located right on the top there. So anything I draw, like a circle, will draw on top of that object. So that's how you control where things are drawn. And the crucial thing is after you're done with the C-planes, you can select, you can either go to the C-plane menu here or that standard drop-down, set C-plane, set it to world top again. That puts it back where it was. So that's important. If you get your C-plane locked into some weird angle, how do you put it back? Drop-down menu, right-clicking on the Mac, because you don't have this drop-down, set C-plane, world top, world right, world front, that kind of thing. But if I wanted to do object, it's also right there to object. I can even do it on this funky little angle there. Now I want to draw a circle on that. You can draw it there. Boom. So that's a C-plane. Super cool. And it stands for construction plane. Where are you drawing? What are you going to construct it on? So let me go back to world top. Boom. Okay. So if I wanted to select this, just that circle there, I could try to click on it, and when you do, sometimes you're right, sometimes you miss it. A lot of times it'll bring you up this menu, and if you bring up this menu, it's asking you, do you want to select this curve or this polysurface? And so I highlight over each one. If I select the curve, it selects the curve. But another way to do it is by box selection. So if I wanted to select the whole thing, I could just grab like that. So if I click and drag from right to left, it'll grab anything it touches. So it'll grab the whole object and that circle, even though I didn't completely surround it. But if I wanted to just select that circle, I can go from left to right, left to right, either way, bottom to top, left to right, and it'll only grab objects that it completely surrounds. So it'll grab the circle on that face that's at an angle and the circle that's at the top there, which is super great for like if I wanted to draw a doorknob on a door or something like that. Or just get rid of this. I can be really careful and not select the whole top one. Boom, just grab that circle, delete. But if I wanted to draw this like a doorknob, go left to right, and then I can extrude up to make another shape on top of it, no problem. So that's different ways of selecting as well. So at this point, you should probably just keep playing with this stuff, play with drawing circles inside of circles, different types of selection methods, pause the video at several states throughout this, and just get your handle on the user interface. The last thing I want to talk about is the types of 3D models that we make with Rhino here. So Rhino is great because it makes CAD-based models, but it also makes more organic models. Rhino 7 is the kind of crucial thing here because it brought in these sub-D tools, which we'll talk about in a second here. But when you're modeling in CAD, you're using more solid-based modeling or surface-based modeling. When you're modeling in a program like Blender or Cinema 4D or Maya, you're doing more mesh-based modeling where you're modifying faces and you're dealing with different levels of smoothness and that kind of stuff. Well, with Rhino, you can do both. So it's really versatile for any type of exporting that you want to do. So we've already talked about NURBS-based modeling. NURBS is a fun word. That's what Rhino uses, where AutoCAD uses solid-based modeling. Different programs use different bases for their modeling. So this is a NURBS object, which is just a closed solid poly surface. So a bunch of surfaces that are closed together. And if it was broken, it would be something different. So if I click on it and explode it, it breaks it into little pieces. And if I delete this little side here and join it back together, now it's an open poly surface. So be paying attention to your properties as well. So what I used right now was called explode. And you'll use that for different purposes in the future, but basically it breaks the object into all of its parts. So I can explode an object, and now I've got each one of these surfaces separate that I can, say, delete or whatever. And after you break it, if you want to put it back together, if you've got the edges going from edge to edge, like two pieces of paper that are touching each other on the edge, I can rejoin just those two segments or the whole thing and make it back to a closed solid poly surface. In order to 3D print anything, you want to make sure that it says closed solid poly surfaces. If it says open, you've got problems. So that's NURBS. Then we've got meshes. So if I took this object and I wanted to make it into a mesh, I could just type mesh. Now, mesh is basically something that you would use to export for 3D printing, or it's a universal language for other programs. So if I bring in a mesh into Blender, it'll recognize the object. Or if you're downloading things off of Thingiverse or other software, meshes are kind of the primitive shapes that you'll be dealing with when you're downloading objects from the internet that are 3D. So I'm just going to leave all this stuff the same as it is by default and hit OK. And you can see it looks the same if I were to look at it in rendered. Yeah, can't tell the difference which one's the mesh, right? So that's where Rhino's super powerful, because now I can just bring that into another software and no problem, it'll recognize it. But there's one other kind that you can deal with, which is called a sub D. So if I go to sub D, enter twice, now I've got this shape, which is different. I don't know if I like it. But if I hit tab, I've got the same shape. So now you look at it this way, back to rendered, and they're the same. So when I'm looking at it this way, it's called a creased sub D. So everything is sharp edged. And then if I hit tab again, it goes to soft. So you can see where this is great for like character design. And this is what Blender or Maya or any of the other software that you might even be familiar with. If you already know how to use Blender, then you can just go to sub D tools and start modeling using that. Now, it's not super accurate. You're not going to be creating like an exact model. It's more for character design and stuff like that. So nice thing about sub D is you go up to sub D tools here and you've got all of these different tools. So if I grab like a face, I can take this face and I can export it, or I can extrude it, I can bump it out, and then I can grab the face and I can even subdivide it. And I can keep subdividing it into lots of little faces, and then I can grab these little tiny details and do all kinds of funny stuff with that. So you will get more into this when we do our character design. And you can bridge sub-Ds together. You can then, of course, the great thing about this software program is if I wanted to actually bring these objects together, I got to clear out of my selection filtering. If I wanted to like combine these objects, I can do that. It'll transfer it back from a sub-D to a NURBS-based object if I join them together using Boolean union, which we'll talk about in a future video. But if I bring these two together, I can now join those together, which makes it a lot more powerful than your basic Blender or Maya software, because you can do technical architectural stuff mixed with more organic shapes. So Rhino has it all. It has meshes, it has sub-Ds, and it has your NURBS for more basic geometrical forms. But play with this stuff, have some fun with it, and we will progress a little bit more. I know it's a lot of information. I would definitely recommend going through this and pausing it at several points and making sure that you kind of understand each one of these steps. That will lend itself to future understanding of making objects and make things a lot easier. Basically, these are your scales. Practice your scales so that you can play like Hendrix in the next one. Thank you very much.